we have a number of interviews that the MEG boards do that I call point of entry interviews. It's when somebody is being brought into a new type of relationship with the Acts 12:24 churches. So there's some commonalities among these interviews, but there's also a distinct purpose for each of them as well. So let's see if we can have a conversation that names the interviews, talks about the commonalities, and also talks about the distinct purpose. So this training video is going to be about approval for ministry interviews. It's going to be about pastoral transfer in interviews, and it's going to be about a CMC interview. So Tupper, why don't you talk a little bit to us about what are the three kinds of people that might come and sit down for each of these interviews?
Sure. So the approval for ministry interview is generally going to be a person who's coming from outside of our network of the Free Methodist Church and outside of the Acts 12:24 churches. And this is going to be generally a person who a superintendent or a person in some sort of leadership in the denomination or conference has said, I really think that this person would be someone I want to place at a church in a ministry role. Distinct from that would be the pastor transfer in interview. Those are people who already hold a credential, or they already have been ordained either at a local church, in an independent church, or maybe in a non-Free Methodist denomination or a Free Methodist conference somewhere in the world. And that's a person who is maybe moving their ministry or moving where they're working in ministry from outside of our geographical region, and they're physically relocating within our geographic region. Or maybe they've already been doing ministry, and that person says, we've been an independent church for 10 years. We want to join a denomination. We want to be part of a larger network. And then the CMC interview, most commonly, is going to be a person who has started their discernment journey about how they're called into ministry as a Christian. And they most likely will have been a local ministerial candidate, approved and recommended by their senior pastor and their local church board. And their local church board and senior pastor have begun this process of giving them ministry opportunities and evaluating along with them what that looks like and how they can improve and to begin that discernment of their calling.
That's really helpful. So what kinds of questions might we ask in each of these categories of interview?
Yeah, so across all three of them, we want to keep very behavioral focused interviews. These are interviews that happen at the beginning of the relationship. And so it's very much a get to know you time. And so we want to not ask questions that say, have you ever dealt with church conflict and resolved it? We want to ask questions like, tell me about church conflict that's happened that you've been involved in. Tell me how you interacted with the other person and how that was resolved. Just to give one example of that question. And so the questions we want to ask across all of these are open-ended questions where the person can engage some of the story about how they've interacted in their ministry life. For a person coming in for an approval for ministry interview, a lot of times this is a person coming from outside the Free Methodist Church and outside of our family of churches. And so we want to ask particularly some questions about their understanding of Free Methodism and the Wesleyan viewpoint. We may want to ask them why they're considering joining our network, why they want to join Acts 12:24 churches, or why they want to join the Church Development Network. For pastor transfer interview, a lot of times these are pastors coming from within our denomination. Not always, but a lot of times. And so we may want to ask that pastor a question about what's the reason you're relocating into our geographical region? Or why are you leaving your Calvinist denomination to join a Wesleyan Arminian denomination? What sort of things have adjusted or changed in your thinking that makes you want to make that kind of a switch? For the CMC, that's an interview that's happening early in their journey, usually. A lot of times they could just become a Christian 1 or 2 years beforehand. Sometimes they've been a Christian their whole life. They're going into college and they feel like they're called to ministry. In either case, we want to ask in the new CMC interview, we want to ask them about what God's speaking to them. We want to hear them kind of give some of their example of hear about their conversion to Christ. We want to hear how they feel like God's calling them into ministry and allow them to share their story about what's going on in their heart so that we can really, as a MEG, get to know who this person is and where God might be leading them.
I think you've hit the heart of the distinction among the three interviews, as well as some things in common. So let me just ask this general question. What kinds of questions might a person in each of these three distinct interviews, what might they ask the MEG board? If they have a question that might put a MEG board member on the spot, so to speak, what might that kind of question be?
Yeah, so, a person coming in for approval for ministry interview, often this is someone outside the denomination. They may just ask, what does it mean to be a Free Methodist? They may ask the MEG board, tell us about Methodism and where that comes from. A pastor transferring in, especially if they're coming in from another Free Methodist conference, they may ask, tell us about Acts 12:24. What's your mission as a conference? We have the Steward, Expand, and Multiply. There are enduring initiatives. It's good if our MEG boards are familiar with those things, because a candidate may have reviewed our website and asked some of those questions about what's the 1,000 Churches Initiative? What's Steward, Expand, and Multiply? Who is the superintendent of your conference? What's the direction your conference is going in? The CMC is probably going to ask some procedural questions, I think. They're going to maybe ask questions about timelines. How long am I going to be a CMC for? What classes do I have to take? How do I connect with a mentor? Will I be given a ministry responsibility by the conference, or do I have to find it on my own? You may find some of those questions across all three of those types of interviews.
No, I think that's good perspective. So in a sense, we're saying that MEG board members are well served if they understand the conference and if they are familiar with any information, say website information, that an interviewee might have looked at, that they also know that.
Yeah.
So let's talk quickly then about outcomes. We have approval for ministry. We have pastoral transfer in. We have CMC interview. So what might be the possible outcomes that a MEG board would reach in each of those areas?
Yeah, so I think in all three, you end up with the question of a yes or of a no, and sometimes of a not yet. And so with a yes, it's a sense that the entire MEG board has an agreed feeling that this person is affirmed to either be approved for ministry within our network, to have their credentials transferred into our conference, or to begin the discernment journey as a conference ministerial candidate. That's going to be your yes. A lot of times the no is a nuanced no. We may say, right now I don't know if we can take this next step. We may not be able to approve you or transfer you in. Why don't you take a Wesleyan theology class, take a class on the history of the Free Methodist Church, and come back in a year, and let's talk again. And this just might be, it's nothing of negative about the candidate. It might just be that the MEG board has a feeling that the candidate or the interviewee doesn't have a full understanding of the implications of joining Acts 12:24 or of joining the Free Methodist Church. And we want to make sure that we're bringing in pastors and training up people who at least fit in within our denomination, within our network.
So I think our training hits at the core of some of each of these interviews, what's similar and what's distinct. But it's a much bigger topic than what we can deal with in, say, 10 minutes. It's why we do have the interview guide that gives additional information. What we try to do is develop MEG board members who have the capacity to do the work. We don't try to prescribe exactly how you do the work. We want to try to create a mindset. And I think what Tupper's provided in this has been very helpful to that. Thank you, Tupper.